David had lived with his wife Maria in a quiet neighborhood for 2 years. They had bought the small brick house with their savings, hoping for peace after David's long years of service as a Navy SEAL. For them, the home was not just a house but a symbol of safety and a fresh start. Maria loved gardening, and David enjoyed repairing old furniture in the garage. Life was calm, just the way they wanted it. But everything started to change when the Homeowners Association, or HOA, began sending strange letters. At first, the notes were small warnings about the color of their fence or the flowers Maria planted. She often laughed and threw the letters away, but David noticed something strange in the tone. The letters sounded less like polite requests and more like threats. One afternoon, Maria was alone at home. David had gone to visit an old friend in town. The sun was bright, and she was watering her plants in the front yard when a black SUV stopped in front of the house. 3 men stepped out, all wearing dark uniforms with the word HOA security on their shirts. They carried fake-looking badges and spoke in hard voices. "Ma'am, you are in violation of community rules," one of them said. "We are here to inspect the property." Maria frowned. She had never seen HOA security dressed like that. Usually, HOA people were older volunteers, not men who looked like private guards. "I don't think you have the right to come here," she replied. "My husband is not home right now." The tallest man stepped closer. "We don't need your husband's permission. We are the law here. You have broken rules too many times. Either let us check the house or pay a fine right now." Maria's heart began to race. Their voices were loud, and the neighbors peeked from windows but did nothing. She tried to stay calm, but one of the men suddenly reached toward her arm. His grip was rough as he pulled her a step forward. Maria gasped and pulled back, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't touch me," she said, her voice shaking. "This is my home. Leave at once." The men only laughed. They acted confident, like bullies who thought no one would stop them. Maria felt trapped. She wished David were home, but she stood her ground. At that very moment, David's truck turned the corner. He noticed the black SUV outside his house and the men standing too close to Maria. Something inside him sharpened. Years of military training had given him an instinct for danger, and right now, every alarm inside him was ringing. David parked quickly and stepped out. He did not raise his voice, but his presence alone carried weight. "What's going on here?" he asked firmly. The men turned. For a second, their bold expressions weakened, but then they straightened again, trying to look tough. "HOA inspection," the tall one replied. "Your wife is uncooperative." David's eyes narrowed. He scanned their uniforms, their cheap badges, and the SUV with no official markings. He knew instantly they were not real officers. He also noticed Maria's pale face and the way she held her arm. "You need to leave my property right now," David said in a low, steady voice. "This is private land. You have no authority here." The tallest man smirked. "And what if we don't leave? What will you do?" David stepped closer, not with anger but with quiet strength. He had faced far greater threats than these men, but nothing made his blood boil more than seeing Maria afraid. He wanted to protect her, but he also wanted the truth. Who sent these men? Why were they here? The neighbors kept watching from their windows, whispering to each other. Everyone could sense something heavy filling the air. Maria stood behind David now, feeling safe again, but her hands were still shaking. David's voice cut through the silence. "I'll give you one last chance. Get back in your car and drive away before you regret staying here any longer. The men exchanged nervous looks. They had not expected resistance, especially not from someone like David. One of them muttered, "We should go," but the tall leader still hesitated, his pride not allowing him to back down so easily. Maria whispered, "David, please be careful." He nodded without taking his eyes off the intruders. Something told him this was only the beginning of a bigger problem. The three men stood frozen for a moment, caught between fear and pride. The tall leader clenched his jaw, staring at David as if measuring him. He had dealt with many homeowners before, but this man was different. There was a calm strength in David's eyes that unsettled him. Finally, the leader waved his hand. "Fine. We will leave for now. But this is not over." They marched back to the black SUV. The engine roared, and the vehicle sped away down the street. Neighbors hurried to close their curtains, pretending they had seen nothing. Maria let out a long breath. Her knees were weak, and she sat on the porch steps. David knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. "I am fine," she whispered, though her arm still ached from the rough grip. "They scared me, David. They said they were the law here. They acted like they could do anything." David's jaw tightened. "They are not the law. They are pretenders. But I want to know who sent them." That night, David could not sleep. He kept thinking about the fake badges, the black SUV, and the way the men acted so sure of themselves. He had been in dangerous places before, but this felt different because it was at his own doorstep. Protecting strangers was his old duty, but protecting Maria was his life now. The next morning, David went to the official HOA office downtown. The office was a small building, with a glass door and a friendly clerk behind the counter. David showed the clerk a photo he had taken of the men's SUV. "These people came to my house yesterday," he said. "They claimed they were HOA security. Are they with you?" The clerk frowned and shook her head. "We do not have a security team, sir. Our HOA only sends written notices or, at most, a board member for a visit. We never send armed groups or cars like that." "So they are fakes," David said, though he had already known the answer. The clerk looked worried. "This is serious. You should report this to the police." "I will," David replied, but he also knew that police might take days to investigate. He could not wait while strangers harassed Maria. On his way back home, David's mind raced. Who were these men? Why did they target him and Maria? Was someone in the neighborhood behind it? When he reached home, Maria was waiting on the porch. She had not left the house all day, afraid the men might return. "What did you find out?" she asked quickly. "They are not with the HOA," David explained. "They are pretending. Which means someone is using them for another purpose." Maria looked around nervously. "Do you think it could be one of the neighbors? Someone who wants us gone?" "It is possible," David said. "But I will not let them scare us away. This is our home." That evening, David set up small cameras around the house. He had saved the equipment from his security training days. The cameras were hidden in the garden, near the driveway, and even above the front door. If the men returned, he would have proof. 2 nights later, the SUV came back. This time it stopped at the end of the street. David watched from the darkened living room, his eyes fixed on the glowing headlights. The men did not step out, but he could see their shapes inside the car. They sat there for a long time, watching his house. Maria whispered, Why are they just sitting there? They want to show us they are still around, David replied. They are trying to scare us. After nearly an hour, the SUV finally drove off. David checked the camera recordings and saved every second. He knew he needed to stay ahead. These men were not ordinary troublemakers. They were organized and confident, which meant someone was paying them. The next morning, David began asking quiet questions in the neighborhood. He spoke with Mr. Harris, the retired man across the street, and with young Anna, who lived next door. Both admitted they had seen the black SUV before. They stopped by my house last month, Mr. Harris said with a shake of his head. Told me my roof was against HOA rules. Wanted me to pay cash on the spot. I refused, and they drove away. They came to my mom's house too, Anna added nervously. She paid them. She was afraid they might hurt us if she didn't. David now understood the pattern. These fake HOA cops were not just targeting him. They were running a scheme across the neighborhood, scaring families into paying fake fines. But when they came to his house, they made a mistake. He was not just another quiet homeowner. He was a man who had fought real enemies, and he was ready to fight again, this time for his family and his neighborhood. Maria watched him with worried eyes as he made notes in his notebook. David, what are you planning? I am going to find out who is behind them, he said. And when I do, they will never bother us again. The next few days were tense in the neighborhood. Families kept their curtains closed and avoided talking outside. Children no longer played in the yards. The black SUV had become like a shadow, appearing now and then at the end of the street, reminding everyone it was still watching. David knew fear was the weapon of these men. They used it to control good people who wanted peace. He could not let that continue. One morning, David decided to follow the SUV. He told Maria his plan. It is dangerous, she said, holding his hand tightly. I will not confront them, David assured her. I only need to know where they go. That will give us answers. So when the SUV appeared again that evening, David quietly got into his truck. He stayed far behind, headlights off, moving carefully so they would not notice him. The SUV drove out of the neighborhood, through empty roads, and finally stopped near an old warehouse at the edge of town. David parked at a safe distance and watched through his binoculars. He saw the three men step out and meet another figure at the warehouse door. This man was older, dressed in a clean suit. He looked nothing like the so-called HOA guards. He handed them a thick envelope, and the men gave him a quick salute before going inside. David's instincts told him the man in the suit was the real mastermind. The fake HOA cops were only his tools. When David returned home, he shared everything with Maria. She listened carefully, her eyes wide. So it is not just about us, she said. He must be running this whole scam. Yes, David replied. And if he is bold enough to send men around openly, he must believe no one will dare stand against him. The following day, David visited a friend named Paul, a local mechanic who had once served with him in the Navy. Paul was a loyal man who trusted David completely. I need your help, David told him. There is a group pretending to be HOA security. They are scaring families and stealing money. I followed them to a warehouse. I need to know who owns it. Paul nodded without question. Leave it to me. I know people at the city office. I will get the records. By evening, Paul returned with the answer. The warehouse is listed under a company called Greenfield Management. The owner is a man named Victor. He has business ties with several local contractors. David repeated the name in his mind. Victor. He was likely the man in the suit. Maria was nervous when she heard it. If he is powerful, it may not be easy to stop him. David placed a hand over hers. No one is above the law, Maria. But before the law can act, someone must gather proof. That is my job now. That night, David reviewed the camera recordings again. The black SUV had returned twice more. Each time, the men simply parked and stared at the house before leaving. It was a clear warning, but David was not shaken. Instead, he saw it as a mistake. Their arrogance would make it easier to trap them. The next morning, David walked across the street to speak with Mr. Harris again. "Do you still have the letter they gave you?" he asked. Mr. Harris nodded and brought out a crumpled sheet from his drawer. The letter was full of spelling mistakes, with a fake HOA stamp at the bottom. David carefully took a photo of it. Later, Anna's mother brought him her receipt, a plain slip of paper with a false signature. David photographed that too. Slowly, he was building a case. Maria watched him working late at night with files spread across the table. "You are planning like you used to in the Navy," she said softly. David smiled faintly. "Every mission starts with information. Once you know your enemy, you can end the fight before it even begins." But the enemy was also watching. Inside the warehouse, Victor sat with his men. The tall leader reported, "The man is not afraid. He followed us. He knows where we meet." Victor tapped his fingers on the table. "A Navy SEAL, they say. That explains his boldness." "What do we do about him?" one of the guards asked. Victor's eyes narrowed. "We remind him that no one challenges me. If he keeps pushing, we will make an example out of him." The men nodded, but none of them looked eager. They had seen David's eyes. They knew he was not like the other homeowners. Back at his house, David stood on the porch, watching the quiet street. The night air was heavy. He knew the fight was only beginning. The fake HOA had shown their hand, and he had shown his. The next move would decide everything. The morning sun rose slowly over the neighborhood, but the air felt heavy with unease. Families avoided speaking outside, and even children walked to school quietly. Everyone had heard whispers about the fake HOA guards. They had become like a shadow no one wanted to talk about. But David was not afraid of shadows. He had faced storms far worse. After collecting proof from neighbors, David built a small folder with photos of fake letters, receipts, and the recordings from his cameras. Still, he knew paperwork alone might not be enough. People like Victor always found ways to escape punishment unless there was strong evidence. David needed to catch them in the act. That afternoon, he sat with Maria at the kitchen table. "They will come again," he said calmly. "When they do, I will be ready." Maria looked at him with worry. "I trust you, David, but I fear they may try to hurt you." David gave a faint smile. "They can try, but they will fail. What matters is keeping you safe and ending their scheme." He began preparing his plan. Using his Navy training, he set up microphones near the porch and installed an extra camera inside the mailbox. He even placed a small tracker under the SUV when it last stopped near their house. With every step, he felt closer to closing the net around them. 2 days later, just before sunset, the black SUV returned. This time it did not stop far away. It rolled slowly and parked right in front of David's house. The 3 men stepped out, shoulders squared, trying to look powerful. Neighbors peeked nervously through their blinds. Maria stayed inside, her heart pounding. David walked out onto the porch with steady steps. His eyes never left the tall leader. "You were told not to come back," David said firmly. The tall man smirked. "And you were told this is not over. Pay the fines or face the consequences." David tilted his head slightly. "What fines? Show me the law, the documents, the real authority you claim to have." The men had nothing to show. Instead, one of them pulled out a folded letter and waved it. David knew it was fake, but this time he kept his calm. His cameras and microphones were recording everything. "Put it on the table," David said, pointing to the porch railing. "Let us see your so-called evidence." The tall man tossed the paper with a laugh. "Evidence? The only evidence you need is us standing here. Pay now, or your family will regret it." The words were loud enough for the microphones to capture. David's eyes did not move, but inside he felt a spark of victory. This was the proof he needed. "I will not pay," he said slowly. "And you will not step onto my land again." The tall man stepped closer, trying to intimidate him. But David stood like a wall, calm and unshaken. The silence stretched until finally the men turned away, muttering to each other. They got back into the SUV and drove off quickly. Inside the house, Maria rushed to David. "They threatened you again," she said, fear in her voice. "Yes," David replied, holding the small recorder in his hand. "And now we have their threats on tape." That night, David met with Paul again. He showed him the files, the letters, and the recordings. Paul's eyes widened. "This is more than enough for the police, David. You can bring them down." David nodded. "But I want to see where they hide first. I placed a tracker under their SUV. I want to know every place they go before I hand this over." Paul agreed to help. The two men spent hours following the signal from the tracker. It led them from one street to another, finally stopping again at the old warehouse. But this time, the SUV stayed longer. The signal showed it moving behind the building, where David guessed they kept their supplies and fake documents. "This is their nest," David said quietly. Back at home, Maria waited anxiously. When David returned, she hugged him tightly. "Every time you leave, I pray you come back safe." David kissed her forehead gently. "I will always come back to you. This is almost over." But even as he spoke, he knew Victor would not give up so easily. A man who had built a scheme like this would fight to protect it. David's trap was ready, but he also sensed Victor was preparing one of his own. The quiet battle between them was reaching its peak. The next morning, David woke early. He sat at the kitchen table with his folder of evidence spread neatly before him. Maria poured him a cup of tea and sat quietly beside him. Both of them knew the battle was not yet won. "You have enough proof now," Maria said gently. "Why not take it to the police right away?" "I will," David answered. "But I also want to make sure the neighbors know the truth. These men have been feeding on their fear for too long. If we stand together, they will lose their power." Later that day, David went door to door. At first, the neighbors opened their doors only a crack, their eyes nervous. But when David explained what he had found, they began to listen. He showed them the fake letters, the recordings, and even the tracker data that led to the warehouse. Mr. Harris was the first to nod. "I knew they were crooks. I just didn't think anyone could stop them." Anna's mother, who had paid money to the fake guards, sighed in relief. "So I wasn't the only one they tricked. We have all been suffering quietly." One by one, Families began to share their stories. Each of them had been threatened, some more than once. Many had paid money out of fear. By the end of the evening, almost the entire street had gathered in David's yard. David stood before them, his voice steady. These men are not real officers. They are thieves. They want us divided and scared. But if we unite, we can end their scam. I have the proof, but I also need your support. For the first time in weeks, hope lit the faces of the neighbors. They were no longer just victims. With David leading them, they felt stronger. That night, Victor received troubling news at the warehouse. His tall enforcer reported, "The neighbors are no longer silent. They are listening to the Navy man. He has evidence. He showed them everything." Victor's eyes darkened. Evidence can be destroyed. But loyalty built on fear cannot last forever. If they begin to believe in him, our work is finished. "What should we do?" another man asked. Victor leaned back in his chair, his voice cold. "We strike before he takes this to the police. We will send a clear message. If he wants to be their hero, let him pay the price." Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, Maria prepared a warm meal while David checked his cameras once again. The glow of the screens filled the room. He saw no sign of the SUV, but he felt in his bones that something was coming. Maria sat across from him. "You are carrying so much weight, David. But I want you to know, the neighbors trust you. They believe in you." David gave a faint smile. "That is why I must not fail. This is bigger than us now. They are counting on me to protect them." The following day, David gathered the neighbors once more. Together, they drafted a statement describing what had happened to each family. Copies of their letters and receipts were added to the folder. Now the evidence was not just David's work. It was the voice of the entire neighborhood. For the first time, laughter returned to the street. Children played again, though under watchful eyes. The people had found courage. They were no longer afraid to look out their windows. But as the sun set, David's instincts sharpened. He noticed a car he had not seen before parked near the corner. Its windows were dark, and it had been sitting there for hours. When he pointed it out to Paul, who had come to visit, Paul frowned. "That looks like one of Victor's watchers. He must know you are building a case." David nodded slowly. "Then he knows time is running out." That night, the tracker on the black SUV showed movement again. The signal pulsed across the map, moving closer to the neighborhood. David studied it carefully. He knew this was not another show of power. This time, they were coming with a purpose. Maria watched him from the doorway. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I think," David said, his voice low but certain, "that tonight will be their last attempt." He checked his cameras, his recorder, and the folder of evidence once more. Everything was in place. He had prepared himself for this moment. The neighborhood was with him, the proof was strong, and his spirit was steady. But Victor was also preparing his move, determined to crush the man who had dared to stand in his way. The night was quiet, but David knew the storm was near. The night was quiet, too quiet for comfort. The neighborhood slept, but David stayed awake. He sat near the window, watching the street, every sense alert. Years of Navy service had taught him to trust silence. Silence often meant danger was close. Maria tried to rest but could not. She sat on the couch, a blanket over her shoulders. "You should get some sleep, David," she whispered. "I will sleep when this is finished," he replied softly. Tonight feels different. They will come. Around midnight, headlights appeared at the end of the street. The black SUV rolled slowly forward, followed by another car. David's eyes narrowed. This time, they had brought reinforcements. The vehicle stopped in front of his house. 4 men stepped out from the SUV, while 2 more climbed out of the second car. David recognized the tall leader at once. But behind him, a figure in a suit also stepped out. It was Victor himself. Maria gasped. He came here. Yes, David said firmly. He is desperate now. The men spread across the yard. Neighbors peeked from their windows, but no one dared to step outside. The tall leader raised his voice. David, come out. We end this tonight. David opened the front door and walked onto the porch. He stood straight, calm, and unshaken. Maria stayed inside, watching anxiously from behind the curtain. Victor stepped forward. You think you are clever, gathering evidence, turning the neighbors against me. But all of that means nothing if you are not here to deliver it. David's eyes met his. You made a mistake, Victor. You brought your fight to the wrong man. This neighborhood is not afraid anymore. Victor gave a cold smile. Fear always returns. We will remind them tonight. At his signal, the tall leader and 2 others began walking toward the porch. David did not move back. He had already placed small motion sensors across the yard. As soon as the men stepped onto the grass, the hidden floodlights switched on, flooding the entire yard with bright light. The sudden glow startled the intruders. Cameras above the porch, in the mailbox, and even in the trees clicked on, recording every movement. David's voice was steady as he spoke. Every word you say, every step you take, is being recorded. The police will see all of this. The tall leader hesitated. He glanced at Victor, unsure. Victor snarled. Do not stop. He is bluffing. But David was not bluffing. He held up the small recorder, its red light blinking. The proof is already copied and sent to a safe place. Even if you destroy this, the evidence survives. The men looked uneasy now. Some shifted on their feet. They had joined Victor for easy money, not to face this kind of fight. Victor's voice grew sharp. You are soldiers, not children. Finish it. But before they could move, the sound of footsteps filled the street. One by one, neighbors stepped out of their homes, holding flashlights, phones, even garden tools. Mr. Harris was there, leaning on his cane. Anna's mother stood with her daughter beside her. Paul came too, standing firm by David's side. The street glowed with light as the neighbors formed a wall behind David's house. Dozens of eyes were fixed on Victor and his men. David's voice rose above the silence. You see, Victor, your power is broken. These people are no longer afraid. You cannot bully an entire neighborhood when it stands as one. Victor's face twisted with anger. He had expected silence and obedience, not defiance. His men shifted again, nervous under so many watching eyes. The tall leader finally lowered his head. This is not worth it, he muttered. Slowly, he turned back toward the SUV. 2 others followed him. Victor shouted, cowards! Do you forget who pays you? But his words had lost their weight. One by one, the men pulled back. Only Victor was left standing, his pride wounded, his plan broken. David stepped down from the porch and faced him directly. It is over. Leave this place, or face the police. Victor looked around. Every house, every window, every phone recording him. His empire of fear had collapsed in a single night. With a final glare, he turned and climbed back into the car. The engine roared, and the vehicle sped away into the darkness. The neighbors cheered softly, some hugging each other, some wiping tears. For the first time in weeks, relief filled the street. Maria rushed out and threw her arms around David. "You did it," she whispered. David held her close. "We did it. All of us together." But deep inside, he knew the fight was not fully over. Victor had fled, but men like him rarely gave up so easily. David would need to make sure justice was carried out. The evidence was ready. The police would have their case. Tonight, though, the neighborhood had won back its courage. And that was the greatest victory of all. The morning after the confrontation, the neighborhood felt different. For the first time in weeks, there was no shadow of fear. Children played on the sidewalks, neighbors greeted each other openly, and people stood outside their homes talking with relief in their voices. But David knew the fight was not finished. Victor had left, but his threats were not gone. Unless the law stepped in, Victor could return. David sat at the kitchen table with Maria. The folder of evidence lay open between them. Maria touched his hand gently. "It is time, David. Take this to the police. We have done all we can on our own." He nodded. "Yes. The rest must be handled by justice." Later that morning, David and Paul drove downtown to the police station. David carried the folder carefully, while Paul carried a USB drive with all the video and audio recordings. At the station, an officer listened as David explained everything. The officer flipped through the fake letters, receipts, and photos, his eyes growing wider. When he heard the recording of Victor's men making threats, he shook his head. "This is strong evidence," the officer said firmly. "You did the right thing bringing it here. We will open an investigation at once." Within hours, police cars were moving. The tracker still attached to the SUV gave them a lead. Officers followed it straight to the warehouse. Inside, they found boxes of fake letters, stacks of envelopes filled with money, and even lists of families marked with amounts they had already paid. Victor was arrested that evening. News spread quickly. Reporters arrived in the neighborhood the next day, asking questions and filming the street where the fake HOA had once held power. Families who had once stayed silent now spoke openly, telling their stories of fear and relief. Maria stood with David as a news crew recorded a short interview. "We were afraid at first," she said, "but my husband reminded us that fear only grows if we let it. When we stood together, we were stronger than them." David did not seek attention, but the neighbors insisted on telling reporters about his role. Mr. Harris told them, "He gave us courage. He showed us that one person can stand against bullies and win, but when we all stand together, no one can stop us." In the weeks that followed, peace returned to the neighborhood. The black SUV never appeared again. The streets felt brighter, not just because Victor was gone, but because people had rediscovered their voice. One Saturday, the neighbors gathered for a small celebration. Tables were set up in the street, filled with homemade food. Children ran with balloons, and laughter echoed between the houses. Maria had prepared her favorite dishes, and Paul brought his guitar. When David arrived, everyone cheered. He tried to wave it off, but they insisted he sit at the center table. Anna's mother raised her glass to David, who reminded us that courage is not about fighting with fists, but about standing firm for what is right. The crowd clapped, and David smiled humbly. "This was not just my fight," he said. "This was all of ours. You found your courage, and that is what ended their scheme. Never forget that when good people stand together, no force can divide them." The evening turned into laughter and music. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt alive. Later that night, as the crowd slowly returned to their homes, David and Maria sat quietly on the porch. The moonlight bathed the street in silver. Maria leaned against him. "It feels like our home again," she whispered. David wrapped his arm around her. "Yes. Safe and free, just the way it should be." Though the fight had been hard, it left behind a stronger community. The neighbors no longer hid behind curtains. They had learned the power of unity. And David had reminded himself that even in peace, his strength had a purpose, not for war, but for protecting what truly mattered. As the night grew calm, David closed his eyes, listening to the soft sounds of his neighborhood at rest. He knew challenges would always come, but for now, the battle was over, and justice had been served.